Welcome back to another UNC basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you are checking us out on our fast-growing YouTube channel that is called Tar Heel Illustrated, I am THI publisher Andrew Jones. Joining me, our director of basketball recruiting and analyst, longtime college, AAU, and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk. This is a sort of a recruiting podcast, if you will, a portal pod, if you will, because Pete Nance, a four-year player from Northwestern, honorable mention, all Big Ten last season, hit the portal, hit the NBA draft, pulled his name out the last minute, stayed in the portal, and has now announced that he will join Hubert Davis and the North Carolina Tar Heels. He is their pickup from the portal. Someone a lot of fans wanted, either him or Matthew Mayer from Baylor. They got Pete Nance. David, what are your thoughts on Carolina picking up Pete Nance?
When players originally put their names in the portal, we kind of looked at Carolina's needs, and they didn't have a whole lot, but you just have to look at what they lost, and obviously it's Brady Manick. You and I have had discussions back and forth between did they need more of a guy who could fill in for Manick, take that spot at the four, could stretch the floor and shoot in that type of role, or did they need somebody to spell some time for Armando Bacot at the five spot? They got a little bit of both. He's not Nance is not Manick, but, he shoots the ball like that, well over a 40% clip. He is one of the better three-point shooters, catch and shoot kind of guys in college basketball. But he can also spell some time defensively, I think. He's close to 6'11". He's got over a 7-foot wingspan. And when I watched him play, we did a film review on him. And when we went over a little bit of that, and noticed defensively, I watched 3 or 4 full games of him. And he's really was good at defending a post. He's not going to block shots. He's not a leaper. He's not overly athletic. Manick, we've had this discussion today also. Manick more athletic, but he's strong. And one thing I liked about him, he knew how to use leverage, and he would push the offensive player, post player off the block out onto the floor. Yeah. So, he does it in a different way, but I think he provides a little bit of what North Carolina would need on both ends.
That's a great take, because that's exactly – I watched parts of 4 games and highlights and all kinds of things in anticipation of this, and I was trying to look at, okay, what can he do that they absolutely need? What can he do maybe that's different than they needed last year? And I go back to the national championship game after Armando went out again when he rolled his ankle there late. And this is not a criticism of Brady, but when David McCormick caught the ball, turned and scored, he did it in a spot that he does in drills. He did it in July. He did it in October. He did it in warm-up before that game. It was a comfortable spot. He knew where he was. Brady didn't push him out. If you have a guy that in that position, doesn't have to block shots, doesn't have to be dominant, but if you can push an interior guy out a little bit more, it changes the shot some. And that's what I saw on film watching Pete Nance. He's got a little bit of a stronger foundation. To me, David, he looks like a 5. He looks like a 5 who can step out, especially a 5 in the modern game of college basketball. But he also reminded me of a guy who would have fit in being sort of a new wave type of 5 in the 80s and 90s, someone that could step away a little bit. That's what I saw from his game watching these clips. But certainly what you just said about defense, which I think is something that is on all Carolina fans' minds, that jumped out at me watching the film.
Now, there are going to be questions. I think there are things that he let's compare it to Matthew Mayer, who, was really the other player, on the radar for them in a transfer portal. They're different. I kept seeing things about Mayer being Brady Manick 2.0, and I couldn't have disagreed more. I never saw it. He's a streaky shooter, but he's just not he's a shooter, but he's not he didn't look to me necessarily like a maker. Pete Nance is more of a maker, but Mayer is much more athletic, much faster, jumps higher. It's going to be better out on the break. More versatile defensively, could switch and guard different positions. I don't know that that Nance can do that. So, North Carolina got pretty comfortable as the season went defensively in ball screen situations and handoff situations. And ball screens have started icing more. So I could see them doing that next year. But I could also see going over the top, playing more drop coverage with her bigs. It worked for them. I think Nance has got to be that guy. Nance is not going to give you the versatility to be able to step out and switch the way Mayer would have. And one other thing, too, he's not going to run the floor the way Mayer would have. So I think with him and Baycott in there together, it's not going to be as much of an up and down type offense. I think it could be from the 1 through 3, but not necessarily the 4 and 5. One other thing, too, I don't think it's a deal also of him where it's an iron 5 like you had last year, because, Manick ended up, once Garcia left, Manick ended up playing a lot. I could see him given time, like I said, playing some of the 4 and a 5, giving backup time for Baycott at that center position. But also, I think if he goes up against quicker 4s, small ball 4s, stretch 4s, I just don't know that he's quite athletic enough to be able to guard that. And then I think you start looking more at Puff Johnson or Dontre Styles. So, that you look at the athleticism that they bring, Nance doesn't necessarily bring that. They're different players. So I think one thing that happens, if they mature and keep bringing their game on, then I think Hubert's got some options of what he can do at the 4 spot, and maybe even with Nance playing a 4 and a 5.
I think ideally Hubert would like to have those starter minutes down in the 32, 33 range. So say Armando plays 32, that means 8 minutes go to Nance as the backup 5. If Nance is in the 26-minute range, which I anticipate, that means there's 22 minutes at the 4 spot to go somewhere. So that's if things play out that way. Very quickly, 14.6 points a game last year at Northwestern, 6.5 rebounds, 1.1 blocks.
That was in the Big Ten, by the way.
Yeah. He was honorable mention all Big Ten, 49.7% from the floor, 45.2% from 3. He was 42 for 93 from the perimeter, 76.8% for the free throw, but he only attempted 2.7 free throws. And watching his game, I didn't see a lot of put the ball on the floor and create something. When he did do that, he usually would quickly turn his back to the defender and use his length, use his strong base to sort of get some separation, had a little jump hook, had sort of a lean in off the glass thing a couple of times, some up and under stuff, and get the thing off the glass. A lot of fundamentals, some old school kind of stuff to his game as well. But Dave, the thing that really jumped out at me are the threes that he took. Almost all of them appeared to come off of ball screens, off handoffs. He'd have set a high ball screen. The guard would drive and flip it back to him. So many of his threes came from the top of the key. And it's not Brady Manick release type stuff. Very few people have that. But they put him in situations to get open and be open. And he knocked down a very high percentage. But almost everything was kind of at the elbow from one side to the other, not much from the wing, and I never saw him on the baseline.
I want to address 2 things here. The first, you were talking about, not shooting a lot of foul shots. It's kind of unusual what his package is, inside, because the games that I saw, I was in agreement, and a guy kind of leaned on for his thought on a lot of analytics, a guy named Sean Vincel, Hoop Insight. And we had discussed him, and he actually shot 63% at the rim, which is I don't know the exact percentile, but it is a top percent. It's very good. But he didn't shoot many foul shots. And the games I watched, he just, I'm looking at him and he's not drawing fouls, and, we missed some shots. And obviously you've got to look at the whole picture. And I was thinking initially, well, he's not great at the rim, but his percentages were much better than what I thought. So even though he doesn't draw fouls, he can finish there. So that's an interesting thing. But we got to see that whole body work.
Yeah.
But now let's go back to where he scored at on the floor, where he was effective. I think you've got to go back and look at the Northwestern offense. And we all know that Collins played at Duke, but that is not going to be mistaken for a Mike Krzyzewski type offense. No. It's a Princeton type. It's more of a Pete Carrill. They really used him as they used their bigs in a Princeton style. They used him up top, doing a lot of handoffs, doing a lot of ball screens where he picked and popped. But the bigs out front just do a lot of handoff stuff in Princeton. Yeah. So it was a deal where, he was getting down into the baseline. He bigs stay foul line extended on top of the key. Yeah. And that's what you do in a Northwestern type of offense, which was what we call Princeton. So
a lot of back cuts too. So a lot of the layups they attempted were uncontested. So there wasn't a lot of physicality in the way any of them did anything. So he was put in positions, I think, where if he's going to get a shot in the lane, unless he's shooting over a guy like a jump hook when he gets someone on his hip or something like that, a lot of it's the back screen stuff, and it's boom, 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 wide open right there. They score and go the other way. So there wasn't a lot of physical stuff in their games from what I saw.
No, and if you want to compare what they did to North Carolina, I thought Mayer at Baylor, they ran a lot of horns, one big rolling, one big popping the way North Carolina did all year last year with Manick and Baycott. And we saw a lot more of that from Baylor. Didn't see much of that from Northwestern. So what Collins did at Northwestern offensively is totally different than what Hubert Davis does in North Carolina.
So what he gives Carolina is, he gives them an unbelievable amount of experience. He played 2,588 minutes at Northwestern, played 107 games for the Wildcats. He's a 1,000-point scorer. So he gives him experience. He gives him a guy who's been banging in the Big Ten, which has been a league loaded with really good big guys. So he's pretty much seen what he needs to see in order to handle that at North Carolina. He's also a guy that has the ability to play off of people, because if you play the Princeton offense, you have to be aware at all times where all your guys are. You have to be alert for the cut breaking. There's a lot of point to the passer mentality when you run an offense like that. So I think Carolina's going to get a guy who appears unselfish. He appears as someone who blends well and can blend well. He totally understands the concept of everybody's on here to get a good look, wherever the good look comes from. So those are all qualities that I think will help a guy fit in quicker on a team that is somewhat plug and play right now. They have a lot of stuff back. They have a mission to win the national championship. They needed to if they were going to bring in somebody, they needed that to be someone who could quickly assimilate, not someone who's going to take a long time and sort of ruffle stuff. So I think in Pete Nance, even though he's not a classic stretch four, he's got a lot of those traits that, to me, suggest he should assimilate fairly quickly.
Yeah, but I can see him stretching offensively just because he shoots the ball so well. So, shoots it so well from the three. And I think you can go back. We talked about him not at Northwestern, them not running what Hubert did runs at North Carolina. But to me, he's a really good type of forward to go into that horns high ball screen where Baycott's rolling and he's popping. Well, and one thing I've been told is he's a really good passer off the top, really good post feeder, good passer. He'd really be good in the high-low. This came from somebody that told me that they didn't know how well he would blend with Baycott. And he's one of the few ones I've heard say that, but he did tell me, he says, I'll tell you what he'll do. He's a really good post passer, and I could see him dumping into Baycott off a high-low deal and just really getting the ball down inside. But I think he's a good fit in that horn set where he can pop, because you're going to have to get that out there on him. You just put him in the corner a lot of times the way they did with Manick. When they're stretching it and they're in a 4-out type offense, he causes problems out there in the corner. You help, man, he can get that thing off quick. He can make the three. So, we like that. I would make this comparison. It's not necessarily a player comparison, but it's a role comparison. Think about the NBA when you have free agency in July, and they start adding pieces, and you know who the better teams are going to be. So let's say you've got Golden State or you've got Boston. You've already got a team. North Carolina is in that realm next year because they're already top 3 in everybody's early season poll. I mean, they're going to be number 1 in a lot of people's. So you go out, and so you've got a Golden State, or you've got a Boston, or you've got one or two, Milwaukee, 2 of your better teams, and they pick up, I don't know, a PJ Tucker, and who's going to be, he's not going to be a max salary guy, but on NBA terms, Pete Nance is probably one of those guys who signs a 1-year deal with somebody, 25-30 million. I mean, seriously. I mean, I'm making that comparison. He would be that kind of player if you compared apples and oranges and put this kind of on an NBA scale. That he would be going to a Golden State that's already got Curry and Klay Thompson and all those guys. Here you look up, you've got a seasoned guy like a PJ Tucker, like you said, that's played a ton of minutes, who's averaging, like you say, 12, 14, 15 points a game, can make threes, can, defend the post, just, and so people would look at it and say, oh, the rich got richer. So I think if you really look at it from that standpoint, this doesn't hurt North Carolina at all.
No.
And I think there are probably a lot of people around the country who pull for other teams, other programs who are top 10, top 20 teams, and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they picked him up.
And just to kind of let fans understand, they're going to watch the same stuff we've watched, and it can be really easy to get caught up in some of the stuff I've already talked about because I was illustrating what I saw. A player can only show you doing something on the court what he's asked to do. If Chris Collins has him in that role and only in that role, and he's not doing some other stuff, well, he can't show that. Remember, Brady Manick was a different player by February at North Carolina than he was at Oklahoma on multiple fronts. I documented every game, the assist numbers that were way up at North Carolina as opposed to Oklahoma. For a guy like Nance, if he says, yeah, I can play that, I can do a real stretch, I can be an actual stretch, I could play from the corner, I could play wing to baseline, Brady was really good driving the baseline and cutting the baseline. If he got all that stuff and he thinks is in his game, well, then North Carolina makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of places he can go that won't showcase that as much. North Carolina will, because it is a need. It is the open slot. So if he's trying to say, hey, I want everybody to know I could do these things and do it for 5 months at a big time place and win a national championship, here's the place to go. Because if he would have gone back to Northwestern, it would have been more of the same. So he didn't have that opportunity maybe to show those things. It's sort of like taking a quarterback who's in a run offense and he goes somewhere where he gets to throw a lot finally. You get to see the full game, or the other way around. A running quarterback who's asked to throw too much, he goes somewhere in a more of a run offensive option and suddenly it flourishes. My point is maybe his skill set ultimately does fit perfectly at North Carolina. We just haven't seen that because he wasn't asked to play in that kind of role at Northwestern.
And like I said, we didn't get to see it either, and you brought that point up. I went back and tried to watch every full game I could find on YouTube, and there weren't many. Whereas Mayer had a bunch of different games at Baylor. Northwestern didn't have as many. And I don't like to look at highlight videos because I could make a highlight video in the old folks league and I could look like a second coming to Dokic. So, you really can't take that. But, I heard Colin Cowherd talking the other day about the NFL, and he was talking about quarterbacks, and he was just talking about guys right now, up and coming quarterbacks on teams. And he said, I don't know, we can't trust him because he played in a run-oriented college offense. And it's not what they're doing in NFL. So it's kind of like you talked about. What he's going to be able to do at at North Carolina is totally different than what he did at North Carolina. I'm way off here. What he's going to do at North Carolina is what I'm pooped, man. It's late at night. I'm wore out. What he's done at North Carolina is going to be totally different than, the skill set he got to show at Northwestern. And like you say, it may be something that it's more user-friendly for him than what he's had in the past.
Exactly. Absolutely. It doesn't hurt to get a guy who's played 2,500 minutes in the Big Ten, scored a lot of points, high percentage guy, high efficiency guy, not a lot of turnovers, not a lot of mistakes. He doesn't foul a lot. So there are an awful lot of things for North Carolina fans to like about his game. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with it taking a few months to get worked out. There's nothing wrong with that at all. A lot of the times, the teams that look the best in the country in November, December, they're not there in the last weekend of the season. We saw that again this past year. So I think having something to kind of work through will be good for this team. And it will be very interesting to see what they look like when they hit about mid-February next year, because that's the club basically that they're going to take into the postseason with the full mission of winning a national championship. Pete Nance is a Tar Heel. He goes from Northwestern to North Carolina. Carolina didn't come up empty in the portal. I don't think that they were hunting down a bunch of guys, David. And if they didn't get anybody, I think Hubert would have been okay. But when a Pete Nance comes your way and you have the opportunity to get someone like that, you're better off getting him than you are not getting him. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. We appreciate you stopping by.